Voxxed Days Vienna in the capital of Austria, where apparently the first snow globe was invented by accident in 1900. Someone was trying to make a light bulb.
Fail.
So on the subject of history, I'm here with Alasdair, who gave the keynote today, the history of computer programming.
Yeah.
So you start off with a language on the Mark I computer in the University of Manchester.
Well, I actually start off much earlier than that. I start off in the early 18th century with a loom that was programmable. So programming history goes back a long way. But yeah, the Mark I, that was Glenny's autocode you're referencing. That was the first compiled language to ever exist. And that was, well, difficult to read, but very, very interesting as a concept, and of course as an influence to what would come soon after.
Was it a huge influence? Because from your Twitter moment that I read earlier, it said that at the time nobody paid a lot of attention to it.
Well, nobody paid that much attention to that specific language. I think the influence was less that specific language and more the fact that it was compiled, and that you could compile languages to run at reasonable speeds. Prior to that, there had been a language called shortcode, which was interpreted, and compared to machine code, that was something like 50 times slower. So compiling, in that case, made a huge difference.
So I thought the first compiler wasn't invented until Grace Hopper. Was it 1956?
Well, I think a bit earlier. Don't have the year on the top of my head. Well, it kind of depends on what you define as a compiler. Languages like Glenny's autocode were still relatively close to assembly code. You can see that if you read the languages. Grace Hopper invented a language called Flowmatic, and that was very much inspired by the English language. So it took something that was very different from what the computer would understand and translated it to something it could understand. So it was certainly the first compiler which did such a huge translation.
In your research, which must have been quite extensive for the talk, what were the standout moments in programming history for you?
Well, one standout moment was certainly that in the 1960s, 4 languages emerged which had a huge influence on everything to come. Those languages being COBOL, heavily inspired by Flowmatic, Algol, Fortran, and Lisp. And all 4 of these languages have been very influential. 3 of them are actually still in use today, which for a fast-lived world as we have in IT is
quite
amazing.
Shocking.
Yeah, and shocking as well. I mean, getting people to actually work with COBOL or Fortran code today is difficult and I think normally very expensive.
Yeah, I heard an example last week at Voxxed Days Bucharest of a large bank that still needed COBOL developers. So there's a demand out there if you know how to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, these languages are still being developed. One fact I mentioned, the next version of Fortran is set to come out next year. This was developed in something like 1950-something. I don't remember the exact year. And it's still going strong. It's changed a lot over the years, of course. I have a book on Fortran, which, among other things, explains how you can program Fortran for punch cards.
Okay.
So that's a bit out of date. But
well, maybe still relevant for a lot of people, you never know.
I think so. I mean, Fortran was strong in the scientific community. COBOL was strong in the business world, and Lisp has been strong, well, initially in AI, and since then in many other areas, and we still have modern Lisps around nowadays. So, yeah, I mean, things have developed, but many things have stayed kind of the same.
Where do you think things are going with programming languages? Do you think we are getting closer to this idea of fourth generation languages, or?
Well, one thing I think is going to happen, I finished my talk speaking about quantum computing. The basis of this was basically IBM has built a quantum computer and they're offering access to it in the cloud. And I think that's going to strongly influence what's to come. But I don't think that we'll end up programming solely on quantum computers. What I think is going to happen in, well, probably the next decades, to be realistic, is that we'll have some kind of programming language which merges the traditional binary style programming with the functionalities you have and the possibilities you have with quantum computing. And that can bring forth a new era of programming. But that's just my guess. My guess is as good as anyone else's.
We'll watch this back in 10 years.
Looking forward to it.